Hello, everybody that's joined us so far. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to let everybody join, and then we will start today's webinar. I'm just going to ask you, Emma, is that recording now?
I think so. Looks like it's recording.
That's okay. It's okay. Just give it another minute or two, let everybody join, and then we will get started. Okay, so people probably still join us, we're talking, but we will get going because we've only got an hour today. Just want to thank everybody for registering and joining our webinar on restorative communication, using it within housing, community safety. Today is the first day of Conflict Resolution Week, which is quite a big thing for ADR mediation, and this is our first webinar of many throughout the week, followed by lunch and learns later today. So yes, like I say, thank you to everybody, and especially to our panel who have come along and agreed to take part in today's webinar. The purpose of this week and today is all about making conflict resolution a positive thing, trying to get within housing, within any disputes, people using conflict resolution to really get things resolved, as opposed to allowing things to escalate. So what we'll be doing first is just doing introductions. So of the panel, then we'll start asking some questions. Please feel free to put any questions in the question and answer box. I can ask the panel as we go along throughout the day. Try and get, any information. If you've got a question for a certain person, if you put the name and the question, then I can ask them directly. If not, we'll just kind of open it up to everybody. So just to get going, if we start with the introduction, so I'm Kim from ADR Mediation, and for those that don't know me, I am the MD, founded ADR Mediation 13 years ago, and yeah, we work across the country with many housing associations, local authorities, to help really manage their cases and get things resolved for their residents and tenants. So then if we go to Darren next.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Darren Burton, and I'm a director of the Social Housing Academy, and we work on behalf of housing providers and local authorities to deal with any housing and neighbourhood management issues.
Thank you. Emma?
Morning, everyone. I'm Emma. I'm part of the ADR team and have spent the last 18 years or so working in restorative practice and mediation across criminal justice and housing and communities.
Thank you. Kelly?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly. I'm the Antisocial Behaviour and Tenancy Sustainment Manager at Vivid Homes.
Thank you. Danny?
Morning, everybody. I'm Danny Drummond-Brassington. I help people have difficult conversations, whether that's using mediation, conflict, coaching, or just coaching to help people resolve issues. I come from a background of litigation. After 2 decades, I decided to switch and try and help people resolve things before they escalate too much.
Thank you. Charlie?
Morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Kay. I'm Deputy CEO with ASB Help. So we do a lot of work supporting victims of antisocial behaviour and working with practitioners to kind of embed best practice around case management. So really happy to be here.
Thank you. And Joe?
Good morning, Joe Grimshaw from Surrey Police. I have a horrendously long job title. I think it comes from having been in this role now for nearly 24 years, but my official title is Head of Antisocial Behaviour, Youth Engagements, Partnerships, Tactical Lead for Serious Violence, but oversee the partnership work around serious organised crime, knife crime, place-based violence, serious and county lines drug harm, along with having 7 amazing ASB specialists that do some amazing work in Surrey. But on top of that, we also kind of look after the mediation service that is funded by our amazing PCC at the moment. So yeah, a bit like everyone else here, is about trying to get people to use mediation, coaching, and hopefully conflict resolution a little bit earlier. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Jo needed an hour there just to give her job title and what she does.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you again for being part of this today. So one of the things that we want to start talking about to begin with is, where should conflict resolution, mediation sit within like policies and procedures? When should you be using it? When should it be introduced to those that are coming to yourselves, residents, tenants, saying, I've got a problem with my neighbour? And we talk about early intervention, but something that I often think, it's maybe not early for them. It could have been going on for them for months before they've even made that report to yourselves, whoever that may be. So just kind of throwing it out there, and I don't know who wants to respond, but how do you use it within your housing world, within the police? You know, when should mediation or when should conflict resolution be talked about? Don't all answer at once. Kelly? Oh, go on, Jo. Yeah, go on, Jo.
It's that horrible pregnant pause, isn't it? And you're just like, I think from a policing world, again, Kim, I think it's really pertinent you saying about, actually by the time they make contact, it's probably not the first time that they've been experiencing this. For policing, we're probably quite further down maybe the line, so that is where we tend to get there. It's been happening for 6 months, a year, even longer than that, before either they've got the confidence to report or actually there's been that tipping place. So for us, sometimes the policing, it does come to us probably a bit further down the line than our mediation service would want, and we all know how hard it is to row backwards to get in a position where you can even have a conversation with victims around the benefits of mediation. So I think from a Surrey point of view, we try and, as a partnership, push mediation so that the public are aware, as well as for officers when it comes across their kind of workload. So kind of ASB week, etc., we always push mediation, get that kind of almost like a spotlight from our corporate comms world. And actually what we've just had our mediation service is to do a kind of easy walk through kind of video clip that officers can use when they're out with visiting victims, to try and describe what mediation is. Because I think you can tell them in a classroom, but when they're out on the beat and they're talking to someone, it sometimes becomes a little bit of a kind of mediation. No, okay. Or a mediation, what's that? Well, you know, it's a kind of thing where they get you both in the room and you try and kind of talk things out, which again, we know for victims is probably not what they want to do. So for us, it's been around mediation first. We now have the coaching, so that those that are suffering but don't want to mediate, or we haven't got the other person wanting to mediate, is a great service, and one I believe has probably saved lives over the years that we've had that in place. And we're just working with our mediation service now around this word conflict resolution, which we've used for years in policing, probably to do with hostage negotiations for, you know, people who are suicidal and are you know, maybe wanting to harm themselves, and we're using that resolution to deal with that. But actually, how can we use that now in that context of victims of ASB? So our mediation service has just at the moment gone away to kind of look around what that could be, where we know we have got individuals who are causing harm to each other but aren't listening maybe to the professionals in the room, and whether that's probably haven't got the right skills to do that. But actually what we need is to reduce the harm. We're never going to make them best neighbours, but can we stop them doing something that either side or both sides is going to regret further down the line? Because we know, as history, even very recently, is telling us that things do get quite serious over high hedges and shared driveways, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we're looking from a Surrey Police point of view, and it's something I kind of push nationally with the National Police Chiefs Council, again, for policing.
Okay, thank you, Jo. Have you got anything that you'd want to add to that, Kelly? And then we'll come to you, Darren.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, that kind of early intervention and that those really essential conversations need to happen earlier. And that might mean that the referrals are made not really necessarily by our ASB staff, it might be our operational staff. So we've done a huge, as in housing officers, independent living teams. So we're doing a really big piece of work at Vivid at the moment around that referral process and sharing those positive outcomes. If you don't share with your teams, this is when we refer, this is the situation, this is the outcome. And as a result of that referral, has there been any further issues? If we continue to share those good news stories, then we have seen and will hopefully continue to see those referrals being made in a more appropriate sort of timely manner, really, which hopefully will make more difference. I'm a huge fan of referring earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Darren, you.
Just going to follow on from Joe and Kelly's point there, really. I just think it's important to be part of that early conversation where all options are still on the table. And I think having that really personal conversation with that individual or that family to understand, you know, is it worth giving it a go as well, and the value that can bring before you go, you know, off down a certain route, or if a practitioner's kind of made the mind up and it doesn't really reflect as it should, you know. And I think you can't undo that poor communication at the beginning when people have made their minds up about the situation and it doesn't really reflect. We've come across a lot of examples where mediation has been offered, but it's often by an email, and that particular person, whatever side of the discussion, the case they're on, has said no and said, well, it's been offered. And I think that's still, there's loads of examples of great practice, but I think we still need to break that down and to kind of discourage that and to have those very personal, bespoke conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren. Emma?
I just wanted to follow on from something that Joe was saying around conflict resolution. I think when we offer mediation, the connotations that the word mediation has for people is that we're going to be in a room together, and it forces them into visualizing it, I think, as like a table in the middle with two people opposite each other who are opponents. So I think if we shift up the language that we're using and talk about conflict resolution and communication and problem solving and conversation rather than mediation, I think it shifts that perspective into thinking, how do we as neighbours resolve this problem that we've got, rather than what evidence can I take to mediation to prove that I'm right and the other person is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a valid point. I was just and maybe ask this question to Danny, as a practitioner and a mediator, or whatever role we use. The barrier isn't it, that they don't want to sit together, and I think it's helping them overcome that. And it's from the point of mentioning or bringing up, we could look at you having a conversation with your neighbour, with a third party there. So have you got any kind of like phrases that you use, Danny, when you're doing mediations, of kind of helping that, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the way I start is that mediation is a flexible process. There isn't one size fits all, and it may be that on certainly a neighbour one where they're really struggling to communicate, I've actually gone to the houses and just sort of walk from one to the other until they're in a position, and a bit more coaching style conversations to say, okay, then let's now have a conversation together, rather than that we're going to arrive at this sort of community centre with a table in the middle and you're going to sit and look each other in the eyes, because that does fill people with dread, and it also triggers all sorts of psychological things in people's mind about defensive reactions. And you've got to sort of try and get everybody into a place where they're receptive to listening to the other side, not necessarily agreeing with the other side, but it's what can you do to help people listen, and what an individual needs could be different to another person, and it might depend on the context of things. And there's something else in housing, there's a psychological aspect of it, and I know that from 20 years in real estate litigation. There's the my kingdom, my castle sort of territorial aspect that people bring, and it sits underneath things as well, particularly with neighbour disputes. Something's happening impacting my land. There is something that's perhaps not there in a commercial or any other sort of falling out. There's definitely an emotional response that relates to where people live.
Yeah, thank you. And like you say, it's and I'll come over to you in a second, Charlie, when you bring up the topic of them talking together, they often say, well, we've tried that ourselves. The difference is we're helping them both to do that in a calmer, less perhaps defensive, blaming way. We're not saying that doesn't happen, but we can kind of help with those conversations.
And there's the reassurance as a mediator. I always reassure everybody, I'm there to facilitate you. If it is getting too intense or there is language being used that isn't appropriate, that is my job on the day. So it's about calming, working out what works for people, and not going in with a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Charlie.
Yeah, I think just following up on that, there's absolutely a perception issue there around mediation and conflict resolution. I think, historically, you might associate it with, a divorcing couple sitting over a table and negotiating as to who gets to keep what. And it's very much that kind of association with somebody wants to win and somebody needs to achieve what they want to achieve, rather than maybe finding that, that compromise. So certainly when we're talking about early conversation, I think it's really important, especially for victims of antisocial behaviour, that they understand what the goal is and what the process is. So we quite often advise that a practitioner wouldn't necessarily suggest mediation and ask for consent. They'd simply ask if that person's willing to have a conversation with an expert around it, so who can explain the process better, what the goals are and how we would go about it. Because I think you're going to get a much more positive result in that respect if someone can understand better what the process is. And it's often about understanding one another, isn't it? It's about maybe understanding the circumstances that have led us here, that we might be a little bit more sympathetic to somebody's actions and find a way to kind of move forwards more informed than before. So definitely, from our perspective, supporting victims, it's about that understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it. And managing expectations, such a buzzword, isn't it? Or buzz two words, managing expectations. We say it all the time, but for victims of ASB, that's absolutely what they need, because they have their hopes raised, their hopes dashed. They don't know what's going to happen next. They're always on edge. They're hypervigilant. So actually having that clear communication and understanding of what to expect can be really, really beneficial.
Yeah. Thank you. And we use the term managing expectations all the time. And again, something that we see is when people are asked to get evidence, fill out diary sheets, their expectation is the housing local authority, the police are going to do something. Now, in a lot of cases, there's nothing that potentially can be done. So actually you're asking somebody to do that for several months, but they're not, and the outcome is, oh well, we can't do anything about that, shall we try mediation? Whereas if that had been suggested at the beginning, then it doesn't mean that they can't carry on getting evidence, etc., if it is there and it's needed to be got, but they're also going through the same process. And I think, again, question that I'll just put out there, but what is really, if we let it escalate, within housing, what's happening with that communication? In a lot of cases, there may be none. There might be, they've gone outside, they've had a big argument. Are we pushing it past resolution, or are we making it harder for practitioners to get that resolution? How do you think the parties that were feeling at that time, the tenants, etc., at that time? Anybody? Emma?
I think as soon as you push people into evidence building, you're making things more difficult to find resolution, because people then come to that conversation trying to kind of weigh down the other person under the evidence of their own wrongness, rather than thinking about how do we resolve it. They're trying to prove rightness, and I think that happens as soon as you start looking for things like diary sheets and noise apps and stuff like that. I think that absolutely weighs into how difficult life then becomes as a practitioner to try and move them past that.
and like I've used the phrase, you become quite defensive, don't you? You feel like you have to justify your own behaviour whilst blaming somebody else. Yeah, Darren.
Thanks, Kim. Just going to say, really, a lot of the cases we come across, the incident can be secondary, and it's that experience of how the customer, the victim, has been dealt with, and by not getting it right, we can actually make the situation worse when you're getting into complaints territory and stuff. And just to follow on from Emma's point there, you kind of got that image of someone with diary sheets stood at the window, a pizza van turned up next door. I'll put it down, such and such. Yeah. And again, it's almost pushing for that perceived breach to an intervention that probably isn't proportionate in the first place, and that's when it all goes wrong. So again, it's really rolling that back and looking at mediation and conflict resolution and those practical early conversations at the very beginning, because otherwise, you're getting into chaos really, and we've all seen it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie.
Yeah. So from our perspective, it's very much around the onus that we put on victims of ASB. So the amount of people that approach us who have been told, you need to document this, you need to capture evidence, you need to take photographs. We've seen some really horrendous cases in the media, haven't we, where actually that drive to collect evidence has ultimately been the catalyst that's escalated the case. Bijan Ebrahimi was documenting everything as he'd been asked to do. And that essentially that sealed his fate, because he was perceived to be, to be a paedophile. And it's really important that we understand that we have a role as a practitioner to support that victim, and the pressure we put on them to document everything not only kind of tips the balance in terms of how lucky we are, how likely we are to find a positive resolution, but it also affects their experience, because if they feel like we're saying, well, we can't do anything unless you do A, B, and C, where does that trust and that faith in us as practitioners fall then? They feel like they're doing it for themselves. And then if they still don't get any respite or any resolution from it, then the whole process has been for nothing. So again, it just comes back to, doesn't it, explaining what we're asking of them and why we're asking it of them, and ensuring that they understand what that potentially is going to produce. I think if we get to the point, and I think it was Emma that said it, if we get to the point of evidence gathering and document everything, have we then gone past that point of having a constructive conversation? Because we've now sown the seed of, you've got to police this for yourselves, you've got to see what they're up to. And like Darren says, that hyper awareness of, 9:38 p.m. he came home and he walked in and he looked at my front door when he came past. So clearly that was an attempt to intimidate me. And at that point, I don't think that you can dial it back enough to have a constructive and understanding conversation. So it just, it highlights again, doesn't it, the importance of getting in there before we start trying to build a case almost. When we're at the point of trying to build a case, it's gone too far.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Danny?
Yeah, just following on from what everybody's been saying, when you get a party in a dispute focus on their position, which in evidence gathering can just reinforce my position, I'm right or I'm wrong, they're wrong, I'm right, your resolution becomes much harder, and it's about shifting it to the interests that sit below it. Like, I feel vulnerable in my home, or I'm working night shifts, I need to be able to have peace and quiet during the day, and whatever it might be, the need and the interest of the party is where the resolution, the window of resolution is. And it's shifting it from positions to interests. So forcing anybody into a positional place, that evidence gathering or just even escalation to legals, it becomes much harder from that position.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. And like you say, I can't remember who mentioned it before, but as practitioners, as mediators, we use the term, it's not, you are going to hear things that you don't agree with. It's not about them agreeing with each other. It's about getting a better understanding it, like you've just said, from that other person's point of view. And that's where doing that earlier on can really have a big shift in the situation and stop things escalating, because they do. What went from complaining about noise, then where they parked the car, the Amazon delivery man came and parked across my drive, everything, then it just starts to escalate. Emma?
I think sometimes the way that we approach other people's conflict can either give them a relational lens or a punitive lens. And I think once we shift into the punitive mindset, it's really hard to shift people into relations, because they get into this win-lose mentality. So if we can do everything we can do to keep them in that relational frame of mind and approach to working out a solution, I think the policies and procedures and those kind of things make the resolution a little bit easier, and also makes our lives as practitioners much easier later on, because people are looking for a solution rather than just proving themselves right.
Thank you, Jo.
I think Emma's hit on the nail on the head from a policing point of view. I think, but sometimes by the time that uniform comes through the door, we're in that punitive stage, or that's how we're perceived to be seen. So it is, how do we upskill our staff? And then the other thing we're competing with is that not every victim or offender lives in rented housing or social housing. So we then have the additional of either the owner or occupier or private rent, which means there's probably been even less engagement with those victims, offenders, victims and offenders. So for me, it's kind of trying to get that skill from a police officer is it's not that kind of punitive, you're going to have to do this, but actually it's the right thing to do. And I think that's really hard when it's a police officer knocking at the door, but sometimes we have to do that because there's nobody else to do it for us.
Yeah. And I think you perhaps led us quite well there, Jo, into kind of what was going to bring up next. The next question was around, it's all well and good, it's all sitting here going, this is when it needs to happen, this is when it needs to be introduced. But, and I think Kelly mentioned it before about within her team, around how we know it's difficult for those people dealing with the case actually getting the tenants, residents to engage in it, because a lot of the time they say no. And we've talked about lack of understanding, not really knowing what mediation is. And I think you've mentioned about a video that you can share, Jo, that you share with people to explain it. Or if you, like we've talked about the victims, can you saying to somebody, actually, let's go and sit in a room together with your neighbour. That's a really, really big thing for them. And the chances are going to say no. So is there any, maybe this goes to Darren first, from your point of view, Darren, in the work that you do, is there any training that you feel would be useful for teams, or what they can do internally? Where does that sit, and how do we help upskill people that are trying to get people into mediation?
I think a lot of it's around, again, the effective communication, confidence. I've just written a few things. I put, be honest, be accurate, be clear, be confident, be innovative and supportive. And I think all that needs to go together, because if someone's asking you, if you're not confident, I don't want to use the word selling mediation, but promoting and recommending mediation, then people aren't going to take that further, because especially when you've got customers, victims, reportees who are not, it's not the first time they've reported antisocial behaviour. So there might be something there for that officer that this person has reported before, and the case maybe didn't pan out as it should. Why should we bother with mediation this time? And it's looking at every case on its merits individually. So I think a lot of it's around the confidence building to really focus on early intervention. Action planning is critical for that as well, around the wider communication, and making sure that those action plans include any reasonable adjustments, and they're delivered and updated and refreshed in the best possible way for that person. So that it's almost like that agreed plan, and mediation can be embedded within that, and reflecting any changes, any updates in the case as well. So again, that's something from an audit trail point of view that's really important. But yeah, just having that confidence. And again, making sure that it's worth the go, for want of a better term, in terms of mediation, you know, to let's explore this, not just offer it and dismiss, or it's not for you at this moment. It might be at someone, you know, someone might think later down the line, do you know what, I'm going to give it a go. They might have spoken to the friends or the families or anyone, you know, who's supporting them and thinking, yeah, we will. But again, it's got to be at that right pace. So it might be, you know, the shuttle option. It's not about, as everyone said before, it's not about, you know, getting people in that community centre at opposite ends of the table and looking to concede and to have to, you know, to give in and to have the other person getting one up on them. It's really breaking that down. And a lot of the issues behind that can be nothing to do with the case. It can be about personal lives or previous experiences, which are very sensitive and often confidential as well. So it's making sure that, you know, what comes out of that can help shape the way forward at a pace that's right for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Darren. Danny?
Yeah, just following on from what Darren was saying, I'm a community mediator and do a lot in the local community. And what we've seen can really help is conflict coaching before mediation. Because as a conflict coach, you show up for that one individual person. You're not there as the neutral in the middle of two parties that are disagreeing. You're there for them and in a confidential space, just helping people look at it, kick it around, look at what the other perspective might be. It's not about saying you're right, they're wrong, or they're right, you're wrong. It's about coaching them through what is going on, what the choice of language they've been using, and could they change that choice of language if they were to go for a mediation. But also, I've seen in the conflict coaching that I've been doing what people's sort of perceptions of mediation is, and not wanting to do it, but actually after some coaching, understanding it and actually seeing the benefit of mediation, and perhaps having a bit more of the confidence to go, actually, I feel in a better place to be able to try and use mediation now to resolve it. So I think, yeah, it's understanding that, you know, a conflict coach is there for the individual and the mediator is there as a neutral between the two, and actually offering conflict coaching up first can help.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. And you're right, something that we do internally at ADR a lot, and Emma's a big advocate for this, is actually taking away the pressure of people referring to us, as in we're referring to mediation, refer a case and then let us see how we manage it moving forward. Because you said it earlier, Danny, one model doesn't fit all. So as soon as we can start having those conversations, we're building the trust up that they have in us as well. We're not saying that we, you know, can sell it better than yourselves or anything, but there's a lot of pressure we feel on housing to get people into mediation. Don't just get them to agree to talk to us. And like you say, and then what we do in ADR is quite a bit of conflict coaching first. And somebody's just commented in the chat that they love using conflict coaching as a tool. It is something that, when I started out in mediation many years ago, conflict coaching wasn't really used, but it's something now that I think even if we don't recognise it, we're using it in every case as practitioners. We're using those skills, aren't we? And I think, yeah, that's quite important. And I was just going to ask Kelly, because obviously from within Vivid, Kelly, you know, you said you're working with kind of upskilling the team and things like that. Is there anything that you could offer other people that are on the webinar today, that this is what we do internally to try and get in there quicker and use that communication and conflict resolution earlier on?
I think we're really trying to encourage our staff to be more professionally curious, because we might not be the right person to go through that door initially. We might be utilising somebody else who's already got a positive relationship with that customer, and that might come better from them. That might land well. Those open conversations could form through those interactions, through something completely unrelated to the conflict or the ASB in that home, because that person might have, for example, a really good relationship with their income officer, and that can kind of be explored in that way. You know, even with repairs members of staff, they're a loophole in sometimes if we are struggling to engage with those customers, if we know that they've got a visit and we know they're going to open that door to get their gas check done. So I think there's an element of that kind of professional curiosity piece in trying to find out that, and almost reduce the pressure sometimes that you might not be the right person at that particular time, to just start that conversation and build that rapport, and it might move along in that way. That's something that we're trying to sort of address internally, really. And I hear what I'd love to do more sort of work around conflict coaching. I think operationally, there's a huge amount of pressure on SLAs in housing. I'm sure there is in the police and other organisations as well. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit of a barrier, because sometimes it's when we communicate that gives us that tick in the box for that SLA, that might not be the right time to get that outcome. Actually, we might need more time because we need to plan this conversation, or we might need to go and see them and arrange a home visit. So there's lots to it that I think could benefit this process. Absolutely.
Thank you, Kelly. And kind of just thinking about, like we said, it's difficult to just even get the conversation going about mediation, conflict resolution, because of the barriers. But do we feel that sometimes it gets forgotten? People working in housing, police, local, everywhere, you've got that much going on. Sometimes it does just slip your mind to mention mediation, or actually them having a conversation together. So we talk to our partners around you may not offer it when you open a case, but you can still mention it. One of the things that we may think about doing is you two having a conversation together. We work with an organisation, or we do it internally, and just planting that seed. Do you think that's something that would help perhaps engage people within the process and get them to agree really early on?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, Kim. I absolutely agree. But sometimes, again, like I've just said, I think sometimes some customers need a little bit more. They need to have that opportunity to build sometimes a little bit more rapport. So we sometimes utilise our kind of support mechanisms in a slightly different way. We might refer to victim support, for example, to give them the opportunity to send that message, because they're an independent service, and we found that works quite well with us. And I know not all housing associations have that opportunity, or perhaps that framework internally, but that is something also that works really well for us. If we haven't managed to get that consent, actually sometimes we find that that messaging from an external independent partner actually lands better as well, and can be really effective.
Yeah, and I like that model that you use, Kelly, because we don't all get on with everybody, do we? So sometimes you have to think, do you know what, I'm not the right person to approach this. I could potentially offer them £1 million and they're going to say no, because we just don't get on with each other. So it's finding that right person to do that, and I think that's really important. I think it's a really good way that you approach it from Vivid and look at it slightly differently. Thank you. Darren?
And just following on from Kelly's point there as well, I think when you're looking at cases from an independent chair through the case review, there's a lot of missed opportunities where mediation hasn't been offered and could have been. And something in the recommendations that we do look at, exactly what Kelly said there, is how is it being offered, and has it been offered by someone independent who, who's fully trained and really, embraces mediation and can have that different conversation away from the landlord or the organisation or the police in that setting. And I think that's really important. But we do look at that and see, I'm sure same goes for Charlie as well, as there's some gaps there where mediation could have been offered early and it hasn't been. So I think that's some wider awareness for us all.
Yeah, thank you. Joe?
I think the sowing the seed thing is quite interesting. So I think it is about, we all talk about going early and talking about it, but one of the things we're trying to look at is around how we get that information all in the right same place for people. There's nothing worse when you can think, I need to look at the police website, and then I look at the housing website, and they're all slightly different but say the same things, and then you might go on to kind of ASB help. So it's kind of where do we make sure that mediation is there, so that when somebody wants that help, they can find it easily and is relevant. So we are, I'm sure Charlie won't mind me mentioning, we're in the throes of kind of almost like the washing machine of ideas around something that actually what we can give as police every time somebody calls in with an ASB issue, is that we have some advice, which is not just police advice or police, because hopefully this will go national, but there is something that we can send out. And I think for me as well, people still like a leaflet or a booklet. not everybody wants to go online and find something, and in that moment of fear or anger, do you go online, or do you go to the booklet that's sat in the hallway with the pizza menus, that kind of thing? And I think what we need to book it in there is really promoting mediation, conflict training. And because as we've all said, if people actually elect it for themselves, the outcome's going to be a lot better than it being kind of sold. So it's how do we raise it so that it is easy to find when somebody's looking for it. And I know when I put Surrey mediation into the Google search, I get the law firms to start off with, which again always comes with a cost, and people don't understand the difference between it. Whereas the Surrey version is free to anyone. But again, I wonder whether that first Google search doesn't get them what they want, and again they kind of switch off. So having something that is Surrey relevant but also picks up the national good practice is something we're trying to kind of look at. A document which also we can future proof. So what we don't want to do is changing it. So the idea being is it'll have a lot of content from ASB Help, which is generic, but then something in the back where we can put the Surrey services in there. But I think that's a problem for all of us, is there's no one place for it.
No. Thank you, Jo. Emma?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Kelly was saying about sort of bringing in those more trusted external people to have that conversation, and it's something that we've been working on in ADR recently. So to try and take the pressure off of police officers and ASB officers and housing officers and people like that, in having to know the ins and outs of all the different nuances of all the different conflict resolution work, and just being able to have those really genuine human to human conversations with people and saying, do you know what, actually it sounds like the behaviour of your neighbour, it feels a bit difficult. There's actually an external partner that we've got that can just talk through all the things that you can do. There's no obligation for you to meet the other party. They can just work with you. They've got all these different tools. Do you want to just have a chat with them? And it puts the conflict resolution process in a less scary box, I think, and sort of places the mediation service as a trusted partnership for that person, rather than the officer dealing with it having to think, does this fit the mediation criteria yet? I'll wait till it's got a bit worse and then I'll just put some mediation in when I remember, and kind of places in that, do you know what, actually there's some experts out there that can really help you. Do you want us to put you in touch with them? And so we are trying to shift where we sit in the process with our partner organisations.
Yeah. Thank you, Jo.
I think that's a really good shout. And again, I'm thinking and listening at the same time. But for me, we've probably got loads of I don't know what you want to call them, champions, people that on our behalf, like Emma was talking about. But the amount of calls we get in from elected members about neighbour disputes, whatever you want to call it, going on, and looking for police for a solution. And actually, probably they already had the solution if they knew about actually conflict resolution mediation service. I'm also thinking like the faith sector, GP sector, to other places where people will probably go and voice a concern because they don't want to come to the housing provider, they don't want to come to policing, but actually they're still reaching out for help. And that question is, how do we upskill those other individuals that are also having conversations? And I suppose we probably could only do that locally, but it's one to think about wherever you're working this morning, is actually does your network of key individuals, as we call them in policing, are they aware of this service and maybe could help put it in the right place, Emma?
That is, and like you say, it's widening the scope of people that use or have access to that mediation, conflict resolution, whatever, because people do talk to who they trust. And I think just one of the comments there from Caroline, who's on the webinar today, who said that it is important to plant the seed early, and we sell conflict coaching as one-to-one support. And again, some feedback that we've had is, you say conflict coaching, people go, I don't need coaching. It's they're the problem, not me. They should be having it. And I think maybe this is for you, Charlie, as a victim being said, oh, you can have conflict coaching, they're thinking, well, I'm not the problem, this isn't about me. So it's the terminology that we use as well, isn't it? Whereas if you say, oh, I can refer you to ADR, whoever, mediation service, they can help support you and they'll talk to you about what's happening for you, gives it a very, very different feel, doesn't it? So yeah, so I'll go to Charlie and then, yeah, Dan.
Yeah, you nailed it there, Kim. Absolutely. It's about the language. It's about the words that we use and how that puts things across. You know, it's one of the biggest things that we talk to practitioners about. The words you use when you're talking to a victim can make or break your case and your relationship. You know, when we're starting to refer to things as petty or trivial or low level, or, you know, all of these words that we all say, oh God, I hate that, but actually they're still used so often and so consistently in practice, and immediately that will start putting obstacles between you and your tenant, your victim, because they don't feel like you believe them, or they don't feel that you're listening and appreciating what it is that they're going through. And so you're right, when we talk about terms like conflict coaching, you potentially do get that reaction of, well, why do I need coaching in something when actually I'm the victim here? It's not seen to them perhaps as a conflict, more of an assault. And so I think it's really important, like you say, to get it right in how we frame it in order to get that acceptance, because with it all comes that personal accountability. So even your victims who feel like they are on the receiving end of it, maybe there is some kind of personal accountability there as well for how they interact and how they've handled the situation, or you know, what was the precursor, anything like that. And it's about supporting them to be open to that conversation. So if we can't get it right at the beginning with how we're discussing it and how we're talking about it, we've got no hope of trying to get that person through the process.
Yeah, thank you. Darren?
It's just a really quick point. I think one of the challenges is where, particularly in a close-knit community where everyone knows each other, if there's been a bad experience of mediation and an issue arises again, then neighbours, friends, other people are going to say, oh, so-and-so had it down the road, it's a waste of time, I'm not putting myself through that. So it's that constant awareness and really looking, there's so many different strands to mediation and conflict resolution. It can be bespoke to that person as well. So it's not one size fits all. And I think that's that regular communication and that's awareness needs to be constant, really. Otherwise, you know, there's going to be missed opportunities again, and you've got to break down those perceptions.
Yeah, thank you. And a comment that has been put in the chat as well from somebody who has said, we just had confirmation today that Anna from ADR will be speaking with our customers in relation to the referral that they've made. I'm so pleased. We do see how it really does help, you know, the teams and people making those referrals, because it's freeing them up from having to have some of these conversations, having to come in on a Monday morning knowing that there's going to be like 20 emails that's been sent over the weekend by somebody who's complaining about the neighbour. And also looking at it from two kind of different sides. We're there as neutral, we're there to help them both. And the feedback that we get a lot is, it's the first time anybody's ever asked me what's happening for me. Because what can easily happen is somebody makes a complaint, the other person gets sent a letter. We've had a complaint about noise from our property, for example, and actually their response is, they've complained about me. I've been putting up with A, B, C, D from them for months, years, and I've not said anything because I didn't want to fall out with them. So you're already escalating that, as opposed to, okay, that complaint's come in, yes, we'll make your neighbour aware, but actually we could refer you, or, you know, and people can come out, find out what's happening for you both and see how they can help you move this forward positively. Because it does really bring a lot of defensive feelings out. Because a lot of the time, like we mentioned at the beginning, it's not the first incident that's happened. Danny?
I was just going to follow on, Kim, because it's absolutely about you. Often that there's always two sides to a story. That doesn't mean that both they're both equal, but there are two sides. And to your point about escalation without understanding, I was doing a community mediation about noise disturbance a while ago, and one party just complained, the other side had been sent a letter, but actually when you got them in the room, the neighbour who had made the complaint heard and actually acknowledged for the first time that the noise wasn't being made to target them. It was being made because her son was non-verbal and he communicated sometimes by loud outbursts. So what you had was a sort of original position of, I'm complaining, I'm not putting up with this noise, to, I understand it's not targeted at me. And the response next time from the noisy neighbours came from compassion, understood that she was struggling with her son and offered to help. And it was just so powerful to see how understanding and communication, just acknowledging each side's perspective. And I appreciate, particular cases might not be appropriate, but that acknowledgement, as you said, of what's happening on both sides is really, really important.
Yeah, it is. And like you say, we are, as practitioners, we're taught to be curious, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding. So when we get referral through and it may say noise on it, us as practitioners look at it and go, when did it start? How did it start? And that's what we do as part of that coaching, mediation, any conflict resolution conversations that we're having, communication that we're having, is understanding, where did it start? Were you friends before? And a lot of the times, once we start understanding that and getting them to understand where it started from, helps then to move it forward into some kind of positive resolution. So we've got 10 minutes left. So if anybody else wants to kind of put any comments or have any questions for anybody that's on the panel today, please feel free to do so and we can ask. But I think from our point of view, it is that using it, isn't it, as soon as possible, having the right materials, like you've talked about, Joe, making it accessible, but not the hard sell. And I don't like saying selling mediation, but that's what we're doing. The hard sell of do mediation. It is voluntary, but it is a tool that could help. So they're coming to yourselves, housing, whoever, and saying, we need help with this situation. If at that first, really communicating, even if they've tried communicating themselves before, is key. But it's thinking about the different models that can be used as well. It's not just mediation, it's not just coaching, conflict coaching, or one-to-one support, which is much nicer term, I think. It's how that can be done. So I just kind of wanted to ask everybody if you just had a little tip or something that, to say to everybody of what potentially they could do differently to help get in there and get the tenants communicating early on. So if we just go around and just ask everybody. So I'll start with you, Darren. You're on mute.
I thought I'd survived that one, didn't I? I think it's just really appreciating the true value that mediation can bring to the table, and have, and always looking for that opportunity sooner. But I mean, it can sometimes fit later down the line, but it's just really, when someone's ready for that, and really explaining and offering in a way that works best for them. And I think there's too much examples of offering mediation and then someone says no and then moving on. Really, I think it's keeping that conversation going. If someone doesn't want to, it's entirely voluntary, but what could this bring to help you move forward with your life and help sustain tenancies and make a difference in the community. So I think always having it there at the forefront, I think, is really important, and we're probably not quite there yet, I don't think.
Yeah. Thank you. Danny?
I think for me, it's the language we use to talk about mediation. I think, Kim, you said it's sort of, see it as cases, and equipping people on the front line to be able to have the right language to use, so it isn't seen as another process that you get forced into. It's working out what that right language is and equipping everybody with that to move it forward.
Yeah, thank you. Emma?
Yeah, I think from the earliest possible point, keep the relational lens on it. How do you work on this together as a partnership of people that are experiencing a problem, rather than using that punitive language that immediately pushes people into that opposition win-lose kind of mentality. So keep it relational, keep your language relational, and your policies and procedures, keep those relational as well, rather than starting punitive and then adding mediation as a bolt-on when nothing else has worked.
Thank you. Charlie?
For me, I think it's about remembering that we're dealing with human beings, and actually there's emotions and there's feelings, and they're not always right, they're not always, you know, appropriate, but that's the nature of life, isn't it? And remembering that we're not just ticking a box and making sure that we've discussed that, fine, let's move on. It's about genuinely wanting to facilitate a better quality of life for everyone who's involved. And it's, you know, it's kind of easy to get maybe that compassion fatigue and just, you know, self-preservation. It's a hard job to do sometimes, and we kind of have to box it off a little bit, and maybe we come a little bit robotic about it. So just occasionally taking the time to remember that we are dealing with people and their lives, and just remembering that. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Cool. Where do I go now? It's kind of it's that end of that round table thing, isn't it? They go, what they've said.
Yeah.
So if I throw it from a police's perspective and to out there is when you think you're going to have to want to speak to a police officer, come in peace, not in war, is one of the things I always say. Is it's much easier to try and solve a problem together when actually there is still some calm. It's much harder when, you know, police are there every day of the week and there's, you know, riot vans and, you know, all of that, and then trying to then work out the best route to do it. And I think by then, as I think we've already said here in the last hour, it's probably lost the point of what we're trying to do here. So and it goes both ways. Whenever I talk to police officers, I will say, you know, if I was your boss, I'd expect you at least once a month being going having a cup of tea and a walk around with one of your housing officers, just to show that you're kind of, you're all together, you're all walking around trying to keep this place safe. And that's when the best intelligence is shared over a chocolate biscuit and a cup of tea, in my opinion. Yeah. But yeah, so would probably what I'd say if you're looking at involving the police.
Yeah. Thank you. And Kelly?
Ah, you've come to me last.
I know, sorry.
It's fine. I won't go over the points that have been made. The tea and biscuits are obviously really up there. I think we could maybe just all be encouraged to be a little bit more creative around the guidance and the information that we have and how accessible it is. You know, I'm just thinking from a housing perspective. Our trade staff, for example, are out in our houses all the time. There are eyes in their ears. And they've got lanyards with little QR codes on around how people could maybe pay their rent, signposting them to a portal account. But actually, when they're having a cup of tea, doing a piece of work in someone's house and they're sharing conflict, why do we not have something on the QR codes around that? Because that's so important, and maybe we're missing a little bit of a creative step. Just one other thing, I think share the successes. I think they're so important, and undertake internal audits around what works and what doesn't, because they've been hugely helpful for us internally.
Thank you. And yeah, just to kind of sum up probably what you've all said, so I will be repeating, but it's embedding, from my point of view, it's embedding that into the ways that you work, not just having it written in your policy and your procedures, but having those creative, like you've just said there, Kelly, creative ways, QR codes, the good news stories. We were approached by a housing association last week, saying, this case has gone amazing. Can we share this story? Share it, you know, get it out there, because people like good news stories. And like I say, it's about getting that embedded, and not just with words and theory, practically. What does that look like? It's in your policy and procedures. How does that practically then need to be rolled out? And I think, again, perhaps you said earlier, Kelly, not just to your housing officers and your ASB officers, contact centres, when they're taking those first calls, is that something that they need to be aware of as well, that is an option? So yeah, getting it out there. So we are coming to the end now. Thank you everybody for joining us. There is a lunch and learn run by Kathy today at 12:30. on this session. So if anybody wanted to join that, it's on our website. So and that's around what we've talked about today, but also looking at how policies and procedures and how it works with that. So thank you very much to everybody that's joined us today. Thank you to our panel. Those that are joining us at the conference on Thursday, you will see a lot of our faces again. And yeah, just thank you very much. And a lot of people are saying thank you on there. I think hopefully it's been a good session and a lot has been gained from it. So yes, thank you everybody and goodbye.
Bye.